Picture a country with no coastline, no colonies, no empire, and no oil. A landlocked nation roughly the size of the state of Maryland, surrounded on all sides by larger, more powerful neighbors. A country with almost no natural resources worth speaking of. A country that speaks 4 different languages and has spent much of its history on the edge of internal fragmentation. A country so small and so exposed that, by every conventional measure of geopolitical logic, it should have been conquered, absorbed, or simply left behind long ago. Now picture that same country as home to the most stable banks on Earth. A place where the wealthiest individuals, the most powerful corporations, and the most secretive governments in the world choose to keep their money. A nation where the currency is so trusted that in times of global crisis, investors flee to it as a safe haven the way frightened people flee to higher ground. A country with one of the highest per capita incomes on Earth, a standard of living that consistently ranks among the very best in the world, and a financial sector so vast and so powerful that it manages assets worth several times the size of its own economy. This is Switzerland, and it did not get rich by accident. While the rest of Europe spent 3 centuries fighting wars, building empires, losing empires, and rebuilding from the rubble, Switzerland built something quieter, more durable, and in many ways more powerful than any of them. It built trust, and then it charged the world handsomely for it. This is the story of how Switzerland got rich while everyone else went to war. Switzerland's neutrality is the starting point of everything, but it is deeply misunderstood by most people who invoke it. Swiss neutrality is not pacifism. It is not weakness. It is not simply the absence of a foreign policy. It is a carefully constructed, actively maintained, and heavily armed strategic position that Switzerland has pursued with extraordinary consistency for over 500 years. The origins go back to 1515, to a catastrophic Swiss military defeat at the Battle of Marignano, where a Swiss mercenary army was broken by French forces in northern Italy. Before Marignano, Swiss soldiers were the most feared fighters in Europe, mercenaries for hire whose pike formations had dominated European battlefields for a century. After Marignano, Swiss leaders drew a stark conclusion. Military adventurism was a losing game for a small, resource-poor nation surrounded by great powers. The only winning strategy was to stay out. They formalized this position in the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which recognized Swiss independence and implicitly acknowledged its neutral status. The Congress of Vienna in 1815 made it explicit. The great powers of Europe formally guaranteed Swiss neutrality in perpetuity, partly because a neutral Switzerland was useful to all of them as a buffer zone and a meeting place. But crucially, Switzerland backed its neutrality with military force. The Swiss army, built around universal male conscription, was designed not to fight wars abroad, but to make invading Switzerland so costly that no rational enemy would bother. Every Swiss male served in the military and kept his weapon at home. Mountain fortifications were built throughout the Alps. The famous Réduit National, a plan to retreat into the Alps and fight indefinitely from fortress positions, made Switzerland a genuinely unappealing target even for Nazi Germany, which surrounded it on 3 sides during World War II and chose in the end not to invade. Neutrality was the product. The Swiss military was its guarantee, and from that guaranteed neutrality flowed everything else. Banking followed naturally from neutrality, but its specific character, the obsessive secrecy, the almost religious discretion, has roots that go deeper than mere financial strategy. Geneva in the 16th and 17th centuries became a refuge for Protestant Huguenots fleeing persecution in Catholic France. Many of these refugees were merchants and financiers, men who brought capital, skills, and commercial networks with them. They built Geneva into a financial center, serving the courts and aristocracies of Europe, particularly France. By the 18th century, Swiss bankers were managing the private fortunes of the French royal family and the French nobility, And discretion was not a marketing strategy, it was a survival requirement. In a world where financial information could mean political ruin, imprisonment, or death, a banker who talked was a banker who lost his clients and possibly his life. This culture of silence became embedded in Swiss financial practice long before it became Swiss law. The critical moment came in 1934. Switzerland passed its famous Banking Act, which for the first time codified banking secrecy as a matter of criminal law. Revealing information about a client's account became a criminal offense, punishable by imprisonment, not merely a civil matter. Swiss bankers were legally prohibited from cooperating with foreign tax authorities or law enforcement agencies, except in cases of genuine criminal activity as defined by Swiss law, and crucially, tax evasion was not considered a crime under Swiss law. Only tax fraud was. The timing was not coincidental. Europe in 1934 was rapidly becoming a very dangerous place for wealthy people with assets in the wrong place. Hitler had just taken power in Germany. The Nazi regime was confiscating Jewish assets, persecuting political opponents, and demanding that German banks report account holders to the state. Jewish families across Europe were desperately seeking somewhere safe to put their money beyond the reach of governments that might seize it. Switzerland offered exactly that. A legally guaranteed vault, and the money poured in. World War II was Switzerland's most morally complex chapter, and, economically, one of its most consequential. While Europe burned, Switzerland did business with both sides. Swiss banks accepted deposits from Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi persecution. They also did business with the Nazi regime itself. The Swiss National Bank accepted looted gold from Germany. Gold that historians later established included gold taken from the central banks of occupied nations and, in quantities that remain disputed, gold taken from the victims of the Holocaust themselves, including dental gold extracted from the dead. Swiss banks held accounts for Nazi officials and organizations. Swiss companies supplied precision instruments, machine tools, and other goods to German industry throughout the war. Swiss railways transported German goods through the Alps. Switzerland was, in the clinical phrase of economic historians, a crucial node in the Nazi war economy. None of this was unique to Switzerland. Neutral nations invariably trade with belligerents, but the scale of Swiss economic entanglement with Nazi Germany was substantial, and the banking sector's role in holding wartime assets became a source of bitter controversy decades later. In the 1990s, under intense international pressure, Swiss banks were forced to establish a fund to compensate Holocaust survivors and their heirs whose assets had been held in Swiss accounts that were never returned after the war. The settlement eventually reached $1.25 billion. But in the immediate post-war period, Switzerland emerged from the war with its infrastructure intact, its banks full, its currency strong, and its international reputation, tarnished but intact, as the world's most reliable financial safe house. While France, Germany, Britain, Italy, and the rest of Europe spent the late 1940s and 1950s rebuilding from rubble, Switzerland was already operating from a position of financial strength that its neighbors would take decades to approach. The post-war decades transformed Swiss banking from a European private wealth business into a genuinely global financial infrastructure. The numbered account, an account identified only by a number rather than a name, known only to a handful of senior bank officials, became the iconic symbol of Swiss financial secrecy. For dictators, oligarchs, corrupt politicians, and tax evaders across the developing and developed world alike, a Swiss numbered account was the gold standard of financial privacy. Money from every corner of the world flowed into Geneva, Zurich, and Basel. Meanwhile, Switzerland developed a second financial pillar alongside private banking, the insurance and reinsurance industry. Swiss Re, founded in 1863, became one of the largest reinsurance companies in the world. Zurich Insurance grew into a global giant. The logic was the same as banking. In a world of instability and conflict, Switzerland's stability made it the natural home for institutions whose entire business model depended on long-term financial reliability. A third pillar was the watch industry, which sounds trivial until you understand that Swiss watchmaking at its peak was a precision manufacturing industry of extraordinary sophistication, producing the world's most trusted instruments for navigation, industry, and personal adornment. The watch industry was a physical embodiment of the Swiss brand: precision, reliability, quality, durability. The same values that made people trust Swiss banks made them pay a premium for Swiss watches. By the 1970s, Switzerland had built an economy almost entirely based on trust and expertise, rather than raw materials or cheap labor. It had no oil. It had no iron ore. It had no empire to extract resources from. What it had was a reputation, painstakingly constructed over centuries, as the most reliable, most discreet, and most competent custodian of other people's money and other people's problems. The Swiss financial model began facing serious pressure in the early 21st century. After the 2008 financial crisis, governments across Europe and America, facing enormous budget deficits, the United States took the most aggressive approach. American prosecutors targeted UBS, Switzerland's largest bank, threatening it with criminal charges unless it revealed the names of American account holders. In 2009, UBS settled, paying $780 million in fines and handing over the names of over 4,000 American clients. It was a moment that shook the Swiss banking world to its foundations. Under sustained international pressure, Switzerland eventually agreed to participate in automatic tax information exchange with foreign governments that had been the bedrock of Swiss financial power since 1934. Banking secrecy, in its classic form, is now essentially gone. And yet Switzerland remains extraordinarily wealthy, because it turns out that what Switzerland actually sold was never only secrecy. It was stability, expertise, legal reliability, and institutional quality. These things survived the end of banking secrecy. The country adapted, as it always had, and found new ways to charge the world for the one thing it had always been selling. Switzerland never built an empire. It never conquered territory or extracted resources from colonies. It never discovered oil or struck mineral wealth beneath its mountains. What it built, with extraordinary patience and discipline across 5 centuries, was something more durable than any of those things. It built a reputation, a brand. The idea that whatever else was happening in the world, whatever wars were being fought, whatever governments were collapsing, whatever currencies were inflating into worthlessness, Switzerland would be there, stable, discreet, reliable, open for business. Every nation that went to war paid a price, in treasure, in blood, in infrastructure destroyed, and generations lost. Switzerland collected the proceeds, not through conquest, not through exploitation, through the oldest and most valuable service one party can offer another: the promise that your money would be safe. In a world that is almost never safe, that promise turned out to be worth an extraordinary amount.